Ukrainian lunch. Dear friends, please take your seat. Somebody doesn't have a seat, sorry. It just indicates the huge interest to our Ukrainian lunch. Please take a seat. Yeah. Dear President, dear Prime Ministers, Ministers, Excellencies, friends, thank you very much for your participation in our 8th traditional Ukrainian lunch during Munich Security Conference. It's great that already for many years, almost every big majority of European leaders participated in our traditional lunch during this war. But what's important, it's first time since war started that official representative of the administration of the United States of America also participate in our lunch, and I'm thankful to special envoy of President Trump, General Kellogg, and special envoy also of President Trump, Rick Grinnell, that you are here. It's a very important sign for Ukrainians from my point of view. Thank you. We call our lunch, you see, your country first, win with us. I will explain. I really like when leaders say, it's interest of my country, this is my first priority. It is very natural for president of any country, of the United States and Estonia, and prime ministers of Iceland and Denmark and Croatia and other leaders. Of course, it's very natural. But if somebody says, interest of my country first, it means that this person must support Ukraine, because, of course, if your national interest first, national security is absolute priority, and it means you cannot let win our terrible, crazy enemy in Ukraine. You must support Ukraine, because this is in your deepest national interest. Before we'll start our lunch, I want to say thank you to the very special people, to most important people in this room. I am talking about Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian heroes who defend Ukraine and all your countries. Thank you. You know, I have, especially during last months, many meetings in Ukraine with soldiers, heroes, workers. But by the way, Ukrainian workers, they are also heroes because they produce products during daily shelling. They're also heroes. And these people ask me very often, this is probably most often question now, Victor, what do you think about President Trump? And I can see huge hope in their eyes. They really hope that President Trump will help to end this war on the just conditions for Ukrainians. And yeah, this is very important. It's very symbolic. I'm happy that today we have on this stage together Americans representative of administration and European leaders and Ukrainians. This is exactly what we need. This is what President Zelensky said. This is what we need for our victory. This is what, only in this way, with this unity, we can stop this war on just conditions. I want to say one more time, your country first, win with us. 3 years of this terrible war, time to win. Thank you very much for your attention. And Zani, floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Victor. Welcome, everybody. This is always, for me, one of the highlights of the Munich Security Conference. Thank you for asking me to moderate this conversation again. Each year, it seems as though it is a momentous moment, but this really does seem like a momentous moment. We meet just before the 3rd anniversary of this terrible war, at a time when we've just seen a fairly big shake-up in geopolitics. We have a new American administration with a very different view, at least on how to go about things, if not on the desired end result. And these kind of shake-ups bring opportunity, as Victor said, but they also bring risks. And I think everybody in Munich in the last couple of days has been trying to understand what the new administration wants, how it is going about it, and whether this will lead to the ingredients for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, or whether it will lead to something rather darker. And secondarily, what this means for Europe. It's been heard loud and clear that Europe needs to take on more of the burden for European security. You will have all heard President Zelensky's powerful speech this morning. What does that actually mean in practice? And frankly, can and will Europe rise to the challenge, and will it do so fast enough? I think these are two important subjects that I'd like us to explore today. And as Victor said, we have a really extraordinary panel to discuss this. It is, I think, the first time we have had official members of the US administration and the Ukrainian government and 3 outstanding European leaders. I don't think I need to introduce them all to you, but welcome all of you to the stage. I'm going to start, General Kellogg, with you, because I think everybody in this room is trying to understand what the new administration is trying to achieve. It talks a lot about the urgency. President Trump makes it very clear he wants a ceasefire, he wants the killing to stop. He seems to want it very fast. People who worry that it would be on terms too friendly to President Putin. I know only one person really makes decisions in this administration, so I'm not expecting you to speak for your boss, but maybe you, as the person who is in the administration charged with, you're the special envoy for Ukraine. How do you think about this? What are the principles you are employing for your work? And what do you think are the non-negotiables for a just and lasting ceasefire peace in Ukraine?
Well, thank you. Thanks for the question. It's almost like I think we're solving world peace and world hunger in 3 minutes. First, before I start, I want to recognize Rick Grinnell, who's another special presidential envoy who's been incredibly successful bringing hostages back from South America last week. And my old comrade from the 2016 campaign, Kellyanne Conway, the first female who ever had a campaign win in a presidential election. You know, it's a great question, and I think I'll cut right to it. Look, I looked at my watch a second ago. It's the 15th of February. President Trump has been less than 30 days into his job as the president of the United States, all right? And we've accomplished more in the last 30 days than the last administration did in almost now 3 years of war. You know, and I've been very critical publicly about it when the comment was made, well, as long as it takes as much as it takes to end this war. President Trump looks at it a lot differently. And President Trump looks at it a little bit like I do. When you're talking about the war, it's in a human dimension. You know, we can talk about the weapons of war that you use and the economics of it, but when he looks at it in a humanistic way, you know, let me just simply put, because I'm looking at my friends there from Ukraine as well, and you know, the losses on the Ukrainian side, they match up, they exceed by triple the amount of soldiers that the Americans lost in both the Vietnam War and the Korean War combined. I mean, this is World War II level of violence. And when you look at the city of Mariupol, a city that has been destroyed, think of the American city of Detroit. I mean, sorry, not Detroit, but the city of Denver, totally destroyed. That's the levels of the violence and the levels of destruction. And President Trump is saying, you know, we got to bring that down. There's got to be a way to have a just and lasting peace. And I think what you're starting to see, I think, in this conference is a great example of it, where you're starting to now people to realize after coming on the 24th of February, we're finally starting to see, okay, we need to bring this war to an end, figure out how it's going to end. But we also need to understand, we need to ensure Ukrainian sovereignty. We need to ensure that that they are protected in that right. And so the question you have to ask yourself, well, how do you get there? And part of this process of this conference was to talk to the European alliance, who are going to be critical to this. Because when you hear, you've got to bring the allies with you as well. And how do they play? Are they going to play a part? Of course they are. But if you got to bring it for a lasting peace, you can't do this on your own. You can't do it at the exclusion of President Zelensky and the Ukrainians. You can't do it at the exclusion of anyone. They all have to be involved. And then that's part of my process. That's part of the process that you're seeing as well, which is happening here when talking to the allies. You know, and you also look at what's happening, what we're going on. It's, when you think of a dual track, for those of you that are not following it, you see that right now we've got actually a dual track going. And that's important to realize. What I mean by a dual track, you've got a Russian track going on. At the same time, we've got a Ukrainian track going on. So if you look at the news, you see that you've got our envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is involved because he's got the Russian lane, and I'm working the American/Ukrainian allied lane as well. And we're doing that for speed because what we want to do is say, well, when is this thing going to end? You know, are we going to come back in a year on the Munich conference in 2026 and say, you know, we're going to study this for another year and we're going to think about it? No, we're talking in time. And any of you that work for Donald J. Trump need to understand I'm on Trump time. And Trump time means he asks you to do this job today and he'll want to know tomorrow, why isn't it solved? So we're working from a timeline. We're saying, and I use the time publicly of 100 days and back to make sure that the parties are involved. We get to a degree of separation. We get to a degree, and this is not confirmed. You go to a ceasefire first or peace treaty first, but you want to make sure that it's lasting, it's sustainable. You ensure the sovereignty of Ukraine, and you ensure that once this thing stops, it never starts again, or the consequences are going to be enormous on either side. So this is the process we're building. You know, I'm going in next week into Ukraine. And then, you know, we're going to kind of compare notes when we come out. When I come out of Ukraine, go into the Oval Office, talk to the president, saying, this is what the alliance says. This is what they see. This is how they see what a sustainable peace looks like. This is what they talk about. What is, you know, when we talk about secure long-term borders, what does it look like? And then you kind of compare notes, say, okay, now we've got a kind of a framework that we can really work at that we've never had before. You know, let me just use a couple of data points so you can have them real quickly. You know, President Trump picked up the phone and he called President Putin and called President Zelensky back to back. President Biden had to talk to Putin in over 2 years. It's kind of hard not to get to a condition where you don't talk to anybody. And I think that's an important decision. He's appointed special envoys to do this. So he's taken ownership of this right away. And he's told the American people this is something we're going to solve on good terms, in terms that are good for not just the American people, but for good as well. And I'm trying to abbreviate because I know you want to get to other questions, but as quickly as possible. But know that we're into the game. We're into the game hard. We're gonna work on solutions. That does not mean to anybody's exclusion. And I don't mean when I say anybody's exclusion, that doesn't mean Ukraine. It doesn't mean you have Russia as well. But it doesn't mean that we are excluding the alliance as well. Because when you come to a final call on this, that everybody is involved, not just, by the way, just not Europe. This is a global issue. And we all have to understand it because, and I'll close with this, because we are facing a condition in the United States we didn't face 4 years ago. You know, when you look 4 years ago, you had the Russians up in this corner, you had the North Koreans up in this corner, you had the Iranians down here, and you had the North Koreans over here. Well, now you've got 4 of them combined, and they've all either got economic or military treaties. What does that mean? Example, you see North Koreans fighting in Ukraine. Well, that means potentially, if we have an explosion and something bad goes in South Korea, you could see Russians fighting with the North Koreans against South Korea. Understand the magnitude of that, and it's something we have to address.
That was really interesting, and I'm just going to pick you up on a couple of questions before I go to everybody else, just to make sure I understood properly. You were very clear that you're working on Trump time. We understand that, but Ukrainian sovereignty and a lasting peace required a credible security guarantee. You said that explicitly. As a military man, which you are, can you give me a definition of what a credible security guarantee needs to have in it?
Well, it's not just, and the answer right now is no. And here's why it's no. Is because one of the reasons I'm here is to reach out to the allies and we say, what do you think? You know, too many times, Americans sometimes have a problem of only looking through their own lens. I've been taught before, you look through the other's lens as well. What do you think? What is your definition of it? And then you kind of pull it together and you kind of say, okay, this is the collective view. And then I bring it back to the person that does make the decision. And Keith Kellogg doesn't make the decision. It's the President of the United States. And I will never, ever move into his territory of decision-making. And if we give him advice, he makes the call. President Trump is the decision maker, full stop, period. But we have to give him the options. Good advisors that I found in the first 4 years of the Trump administration, I was there with Kellyanne and Rick was there as well. The fact is you give them options that are what I call left and right, meaning you give them a full range of options. You never give them, you never cut off any options. And if you've seen some comments happen even this week, we have said quite clearly every option is on the table. And it's important that those are kept for the President of the United States to make a decision. So I'll close by saying, what does it look like? I don't know, because that depends on what I'm seeing and what I get a feel for. But it's not going to be the exclusion of anybody. We're going to listen. Now, you know, and I do this, and I know the press is back there, and this is a joke, okay? So please take it as a joke. But the probability if the Russians say, well, we'll buy into it, but you have to give us back the state of Alaska, that probably is not going to happen, okay? So it's, you know, so there are certain things they say, no, those don't play at all. So you're going to give us a bit of a breathing space or time, but when I say that, I'm not talking 6 months or a year. We're talking days and weeks.
Days and weeks. Well, you said you wanted to hear others' perspective, so let's hear others' perspective. And let's first hear the Ukrainian perspective. Olha, Stefanishyna, you are Deputy Prime Minister for Europe and Euro-Atlantic integration. You were in the meeting yesterday with Vice President Vance. First of all, what is your reaction to the approach from the Trump administration? And secondly, perhaps you could give General Kellogg your assessment of what a just and lasting peace must include.
Thank you so much. Probably following all the discussions we had and the meeting we had yesterday and everything which was happening before this meeting took place. The teams have been working hard to make this meeting prepared, and there is a lot of boiling discussions after the speech G.D. Vance had on a stage, and I think I can confirm a number of very important messages, that there is a very serious intention and commitment and determination to end the war in a just way. Secondly, there is a very serious commitment and determination to make sure that ending the war started by Russian Federation in Ukraine should be done in a manner which will prevent it from happening again. And I think this is one of the key messages and the major messages we heard throughout all of the contacts we had with the US administration, that we're not talking only about ending the war, but also preventing it from happening again. And here we can call it in a different ways. Ukraine keeps on saying security guarantees. Sometimes we speak about the European boots on the ground. Sometimes we speak about the NATO membership. And sometimes we speak about preventing the next war. But still, this is a very important angle. Of course, we all see that there are different ways of approaching the US president with different ideas, but these two major points are key to us. At the same time, I don't think that the decisiveness of the US president means that he has to undertake all the responsibility for the peace in Europe, meaning that he has taken the commitment and responsibility to put all the American authority and all the power of the American administration to bring the war to the end. But it doesn't mean that he also bears responsibility about the accountability of Russia, about the justice. It doesn't mean that he bears responsibility for all the other elements of the European security. It means that he has gain the votes of the American people because he's decisive, his commitment, he makes the promises, and he goes forward for its implementation. And I think I can also confirm that I feel so much more confident than it was on February 2022 when the war started. Because I know that while many things are boiling in our democratic camp, we are really standing together. And I see that European leaders, those who are here on the panel, those who are with us today, and those who are beyond the meeting today, they are ready. They are ready to undertake more responsibility. They are ready to stand strong with Ukraine. And this is the feeling that nobody can feel better than Ukrainians when you can rely on somebody. And this was not very clear on 24th of February, but it is so much more important right now that a European Union stands with Ukraine. It's not only about the accession, it's about readiness to take over something, everything which will be needed to end the war. So it's not only sharing the burden in terms of financial commitment or military contribution, it's just about this is the responsibility of all of us. But at the same time, my ear is being caught with some very concerning messages from some parts of US administration and officials, which I also want to urge to take into account. Just before the meeting, we were recalling with Prime Minister Frederiksen, Plenković, and President Karis, and we were recalling that it also was Kirill Petkov, who was the former Bulgarian Prime Minister. These were one of the first people who came to Kiev. And they saw the barbarian occupation. They saw the massive graves people were put into. Just within 30 days, Kiev region was occupied. They heard the stories of women, children, and elderly people who were massively raped and tortured, and family members who have been forced to watch that. We hear and know the stories of thousands of Ukrainian children who have been splitted from their families and deported and forced to stay in Russia. I understand that it's not the issue which probably might be taken as a responsibility, but this is also the crimes which should not be left unseen. And this is probably the pressure which could not be put on Ukraine to pretend that we do not know it. We know it, we face it, and this is our common historical memory which will never be forgotten. So accountability is out of the question for Ukraine, and justice is out of the question for Ukraine. But we also know that it's a huge responsibility US administration and US president has taken. And I think whatever concerns we raise, we better make them succeed. And I wish them all, and everything we can do to make it happen will be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have raised the challenge to your European friends, and I'm going to turn now President Alar Karis, to you. You are president of Estonia, and I believe you wrote, I think it was just after the full-scale invasion, you published a guest op-ed, I think, that said, it's time to be bolder in helping Ukraine. This was almost 3 years ago. Everyone is now saying it's time to be bolder. Is Europe at last getting the message? And what do you make of what you've just heard from General Kellogg in terms of the approach that the Americans are taking? What is Europe's role in this, and how can Europe step up?
So thank you very much for asking to this panel. And 24th of February, we all remember this day. But for Estonians, it's a special day. It's our Independence Day. That means every time we celebrate our independence, we remember Ukraine. And going back to history, I mean, because it's important, if you look back, in 1920, we also did sign a peace treaty with Russia. So, what I'm trying to say is that we need a security guarantee even afterwards, because 5 years later, Kremlin started an uprisal of communists in Estonia. So only 5 years later, they started to abandon basically this agreement, and they managed in 1940. And the second, what I take it from 1920 is it's always discuss with Russia when Russia is weak. So at the time, Russia was weak, and Russia is weak at the moment as well. Maybe not weak enough, because European has 16 sanction packages already, but there are also circumvention of these packages. We don't much take care about this, and I think it's important to put the pressure on Russia on this as well. And there is a thing which we don't discuss much, because if we don't put pressure on Russia, we also influence the public opinion of Ukrainians. They start losing hope if we don't help Russians. And if they start losing hope, and we hear voices from Ukrainian side, let's have a peace, whatever it takes, let's lose some lands from eastern Ukraine, then we are all in a problem. That means we can't be better Ukrainians than Ukrainians are. That means we have to give as much possible military help to Ukrainian, humanitarian aid, and so forth. Vice Prime Minister mentioned that I have been to Ukraine, and I'm not the only one in this room. And 2 days before the war started, and also a month later, so I've seen all these atrocities. And of course, there is a hope at this very moment on US. I came back from Middle East with the same situation. Let's forget this Riviera issue, but they still do hope that US is bringing some kind of peace to this region as well.
Thank you. But can I just ask you what specifically you think should be in this then? You're right. There's a new opportunity. What does you as a European leader think is your responsibility right now?
Our responsibility right now is just to give more military help to Ukraine. This is what they actually need.
Okay, that was clear. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, you've been a staunch supporter of Ukraine, a stalwart supporter of Ukraine. You've spoken plainly on this panel in previous years, so I'm trusting you to be the plain-spoken, non-diplomatic politician. Are you worried or energized by the overtures of the Trump administration? Do you think this is essentially a move in the right direction or the wrong direction? And how do you ensure that it leads to a just and lasting peace?
I think we receive a lot of different signals from the new administration, and I'm always hoping for the best. But I would say, no matter what happens in US, us sitting in this panel, not you, General, but the rest of us, our responsibility is to do what is needed from a European perspective. And I think your opening question was a bit wrong, because I have never thought that this war is primarily about Ukraine. For me, this war is primarily about Russia. And we need to be willing to write the conclusions instead of asking questions. Are we willing as Europeans or as Americans to let Russia to decide borders in Europe in 2025? Are we willing to allow North Korea, Iran, and Russia to take decisions upon the infrastructure, the architecture of our security? Of course, the answer to those questions is a big no. And therefore, for me, the most important thing is to give Ukraine what they need to win this war. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat what I said last year and the year before, and now almost 3 years ago. I think Ukraine have to win the war. I think the rest of us have to do what is needed so we can make it a possibility. And then at the same time, we really have to ramp up production and to speed up so we are able to defend ourselves.
You did make those points before. You make them very powerfully, but I would argue that we're still not in that position in Europe. We still just talk about stepping up rather than really sustainably stepping up if the United States is going to pull back, as some are signaling it might. Do you think you have, I mean, your willingness and to say it is very clear, but your fellow Europeans, do you really think that there is given that we're on Trump time now, as we've been told, the urgency in Europe to react?
Well, as probably some of you know, Denmark has decided to be number one when it comes to donations to Ukraine. Because, I mean, compassion and words will not help them winning this war. It's only ammunition and air defense and weapons that can win a war in Ukraine, I'm sorry to say. So are we willing to do what is needed, and are we willing to do more? Yes, of course we are, because I am not willing to let Russia, I'm not willing to let Russia to take decisions on the rest of Europe. And I cannot, I'm sometimes wondering, why are we having this discussion? Because this war could end in a second. There is only one aggressive part in this war, and it's Russia. Ukraine have never asked for this war. Ukraine have never done anything against Russia. They have never asked for this war. So this war could end immediately. Unfortunately, they are now fighting. 3 years has gone. Are Europe willing? No, I don't think all Europeans are willing. But if Europe is not willing to do what is needed, then what is the future for our own continent? Sometimes there, you have to be able to write the conclusion, and for me the conclusion is very clear. And until now, we have succeeded in unity, working together, also with the Americans. I am a transatlantic by heart. I will do whatever I can to ensure a good cooperation with our good American friends. But when it comes to European security, many different American presidents have put the same message on the table to us Europeans. You have to step up. And I totally agree. We have to be able to defend our own societies, and it will demand a lot of us. Are we willing to do it? That's a political choice. I have made up my mind.
You have, and you've made it very clear. Thank you. Let's turn to your neighbor, the Prime Minister of Croatia, Andrej Plenković. How would you answer that question? And let me be a little bit more concrete, because there are many ideas being floated around. One is the possibility of European soldiers as part of some peacekeeping force. Another is, massive increase in European-funded defense industry in Ukraine. Would you contribute Croatian soldiers to a peacekeeping force, and would you massively step up Croatia's support?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Mr. Pinchuk, for another opportunity to speak at your YES events, whether it's in Ukraine, Davos, or here. May I say, before answering your questions, a few general remarks which I think are very important. First of all, we are all very carefully following the signals of President Trump and his closest aides on Ukraine. And the analysis that we are having is that we would like to understand it a little bit more in the elaborated manner. Because there are two approaches here. One is the pragmatic approach, which I would consider as in the framework of let's stop the killing, too many people have died, too many young Ukrainians have died, too much destruction has happened, let's stop the killing. And if that is the approach of the win for the new administration, I can understand it. Then there is the principled approach. What are we witnessing? We are witnessing a total negation and violation of the international order, of international law, of the main principles that we stand for in two episodes, both of which happened during the democratic United States administration, the one in 2013-14 and the one 22 until today. The issue which we need to identify is how much the principled approach will be kept. And that is the point that President Zelensky has been saying, that all of us in the European Union has been saying, perhaps with one or two exceptions. One, not any peace, but just peace, which would entail territorial integrity of Ukraine and its sovereignty. Because if this pragmatic approach ends in, let's say, a ceasefire turning into some sort of a la Minsk I or Minsk II agreements, which then become a frozen conflict, and the de facto occupation and illegal annexation that has put Ukrainian territory within the Russian constitutional system becomes via facti the reality on a long run, that is not a victory. not only for Ukraine, but it is also a failure for the entire international community and everything we stand for, because this is the wider consequence of this Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I've been accompanying Ukraine previously as a member of the European Parliament, heading the Ukrainian delegation in the first time of aggression, and I very much remember the situation that time. I've been now Prime Minister for 9 years, and we have extended, we are not as rich as Denmark or big as France and Germany, but very substantive military support to Ukraine, 12 bilateral packages, and we should continue to do that because we are one of the rare countries that had the experience of its own occupied territories in the 90s, which remained occupied for 7 years. Some of them we managed to gain back only when we were strong enough and we came into the position of balance of power with, at the time, Milosevic's Serbia. We were strong enough to regain the territory militarily. The remaining part, which is physically very much similar as the eastern Ukrainian regions, we managed to get back into our territorial integrity and constitutional order system with the help of the United Nations and the strong leadership of, at the time, American General Klein. And we managed. This was the biggest success and the exception, I would say, in similar situations across Europe in the post-1945 world order. That's why we have always offered this latter experience to Ukraine as something that can be useful. Minsk was basically more or less the same peaceful reintegration plan, but it didn't function. My point on the negotiations, with all the appreciation of the American initiative, I think the peace and negotiations without Ukraine are a no-go. Peace and negotiations without European participation would be completely politically unacceptable, given the transatlantic friendship and the alliance that we have within NATO and the bilateral relations, because the European Union countries altogether have given a lot in military terms, in financial terms, in humanitarian terms, technical, every possible way. We've been basically dealing with Ukraine every single meeting for the last 3 years as a dominant topic. And now to come to a situation where whoever it is on the EU side is not at the table would be more than odd. This is my point. On the situation of the troops on the ground that you have put, I think we are very far from that at this stage. Troops on the ground come in different conflict or post-conflict situations in different theaters around the world, but they come only when the conditions are ripe. I don't think that we are yet there at this stage.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to a number of questions from the floor, but first, General Kellogg, you said you were here to listen to perspectives from others in Europe, and you've heard them loud and clear. And you've particularly heard from the Prime Minister then about the risks of an agreement that is, and he likened it to Minsk, to agreements that are not really agreements, that are not just and lasting. Can you, when you hear that, and you also heard loud and clear that the Europeans need to be at the table and that Ukrainians need to be at the table, and you described a parallel structure. You have a Russia file talking to the Russians and you're talking to the Ukrainians. Isn't this cutting the Ukrainians out of the real negotiations? The fulcrum seems to be the Trump administration, with these two things going in parallel. Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
Oh, well, you just changed the whole dynamic. Victor, thanks for having us today. I appreciate it. The answer to that last question, just as you framed it, the answer is no. The answer to the earlier part of that question is yes. Of course the Ukrainians are going to be at the table. I mean, it would be foolish to say they wouldn't. But when you say at the table, you have to define it. One of the things I'm driving towards is we've had a good, remember this war has been going on now, we're heading into the third year. One of the things we haven't really gotten to are specifics. What does it really look like? And we talk a lot about it, and I will criticize, and I know I'm being very, very political when I say this. But President Trump inherited this war right now. But our philosophy is not to continue this war to the death of every last Ukrainian. The intent is to stop the carnage, stop the war, make sure it's reasonable, making sure the sovereignty stays intact. But we're going to get to specifics about it. When you say sitting at the table, in all probability, there's really going to be, one of the reasons I'm here is for the input, obviously. But when you sit at the table, there's two protagonists when you look at it, and there's one hopefully to be an intermediary. When you look
Okay,
at
who are the
Americans.
protagonists and who's the intermediary?
Well, I'm saying is it depends. Notice I'm being very diplomatic about it. I got my diplomatic hat, my passport in my pocket. The fact is, we're looking at, you can have the Ukrainians, the Russians, and clearly the Americans at the table talking, but we've got to have specifics to get to a point. President Trump has been very, very clear. He said this on the very first time he went to the United Nations and the UN General Assembly, and he talked about, if you go back and you look at his talk, he talked about the importance of national sovereignty. Look at his speech. And he said, if you fight for your sovereignty, we will be with you. Okay, he has said that, and he's never abandoned that. So what we've got to figure out is what does this look like? And that's where we're in the process. It's been so easy to sit there and make it a cottage industry of talking about solutions. Well, we want to have a stable environment. We want to have secure borders. We want to whatever it's going to be. But I'm driving towards very, very specifics, very, very hard data that we can say this is what it looks like. And then it's going to be up to the two belligerents that are fighting each other right now, the Ukrainians and the Russians. Is this acceptable? But there's no way, nobody would ever exclude, and nobody's even said that. I would challenge anybody in this room or anybody in the audience to say, when have we ever said that the Ukrainians would be excluded from any discussion? It's never been said. You know, President Trump's been very open about that. 2 calls made immediately, one to Putin, one to Zelensky. Talking with the Vice President yesterday, my going into Ukraine this week. When you look at what happened in the last 2 years, and I'm going to be very, very critical now of the United States, is, you know, President Biden had not talked to Putin in 2 years. The richest career, it's been 3 years. Okay, the fact is you can't do that. The fact is you have to have people talking, whether you like it or not. You know, I remember I worked for a guy named Secretary of Defense Mattis at one time, and he said about an adversary, you know, I really hate this son of a bitch, but I got to talk to him, okay? And it's kind of the same way. So we're going to get to a position where we can come out of this and ensure the sovereignty, the security of Ukraine, and actually achieve goals that we're not going to see a Minsk 1. We're not going to see a Minsk 2. You're not going to get there. This has got to be a stable, long-term environment that we don't want to be started again. Now, and I'll close with saying this, but here's what you need to understand and really take it. A ceasefire or a long-term peace agreement isn't going to be the real determinant of success. The real determinant of success will be the first time a ceasefire is broken. Then how do the national leaders of all these countries respond? Do you respond by saying, that happens? You know, as President Biden said on television, a national audience, well, a, quote, minimal intervention by the Russians in Ukraine may be okay. He said that. His definition of minimal incursion for the Russians is significantly different than my minimal incursion.
You're very clear on Ukrainians being at the table, but just so that I understand, your no was when I was talking about the Europeans. So the Europeans who have provided as much or more support than the Americans in this process, you don't think should be at the table directly. You think it should be two protagonists.
I said I'm a school of realism. I think that's not going to happen. But I said that's one of the reasons I'm here talking to people. One of the reasons we're going out, we're doing it, to making sure that their positions are well known, that when we go into these positions, they're well stated. Now, that may be graded like fingers on a chalkboard. That may grade a little bit, but I'm telling you something that's really quite honest. So if you part of the problem that we looked at when you looked at Minsk too, there was a lot of people at the table that really had no ability to execute some type of peace process, and it failed miserably. So we're not going to go down that path.
I see. Thank you. That's very clear. I'm going to hear from one other European leader, the Prime Minister of Iceland, Kristen Frostadottir. Are you here? And would you like to make a comment? Go ahead. There should be a microphone coming to you right now. There you go.
Are you posing a question?
I'm asking you to react to what you've just heard.
I'm trying to decipher it, if I'm being completely honest. Maybe it's a difference of language. I understand that people need to have diplomatic matters of speech. But I think it's clear, at least my feeling, being inside but also sort of on the outside of Europe from this conference, is that people are still not sure what the US wants to do. And I think it would be good if we came out of this conference if they had a clearer picture of it. I have an understanding of the fact that this is a complicated matter. It doesn't get solved over a weekend. I think it's good that it's been confirmed here, at least what I hear, that Ukrainians are going to be at the table. My understanding from this comment was that the Europeans might not be at the table. And I think this is a concern of people. Because they feel, like Mette said, that this is about Russia, but this is also about Europe. This is about borders in Europe. I'm looking at my Nordic-Baltic friends that have a history of this. So I'm hoping that sooner rather than later, we get a clear picture of this. Because it's also difficult for foreign leaders to be reacting constantly to unsure comments. I think it creates unnecessary, what can I say, press, and it's a delicate matter. But I mean, Iceland has been clear on this matter. We feel like Ukraine has to be at the table, and Europe does too.
Thank you, that's very clear. I think at this point it would be helpful to hear from some Ukrainians. And General Kellogg, one of the most powerful elements of this lunch is that we get to hear from the brave soldiers, men and women who are actually at the front lines defending Ukraine. And I think their assessment of what is going on and their assessment of what they think a just and lasting peace entails would be very helpful at this point. So perhaps I could first hear from Anna Kirnichna. Anna, you here? Would you like to, thank you. Would you like to say a few words? Anna is an instructor of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Actually, I'm a medic. Actually, I'm a doctor. So I will talk a little bit about Ukrainian combatants, doctors and medics. On my last deployment, I've been to a little hospital where Ukrainians from few brigades, I mean militaries, and local civilians get their medical aid. 2 days after I left it, it's been bombed by guided aviation bomb. That hospital is done. And Russians truly knew what they have done. And I had a strong déjà vu feeling because on the very beginning of full-scale invasion in 2022, I've been with, like civilian, like volunteer, I've been in a hospital made by an organization named Samaritan's Purse. I think American friends know it, and not only them. It was civilian volunteered Christian hospital. This hospital stopped its work because we knew from Ukrainian forces that this hospital will be the next aim for missile strike. It was the first time when Samaritan's Purse, the organization with very long-term history, was in such a situation. Next there, I mean Samaritan's Purse Hospital in Ukraine was not so successfully. They get under the missile strike and they've been hit. It's been first time when the hospital, volunteering hospital, Christian hospital, been hit in the war. Never in Iraq war, never before in the history of Samaritan's Purse. Our enemy don't care about loss of war. They're hunting medics. They don't care if it's civilian medics or military medics. They don't care if it's Ukrainian medics or foreigners. So, what I'm talking about, now we face them. But no one knows if we will be the last. It depends on people who can make decisions. I'm asking you from all Ukrainian medics, civilian combatants, please don't let them win in Ukraine. Because then the situation can come to any next country. I don't think that anyone wants it. It's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very powerful. It's an enemy that hunts down medics, hunts down medical personnel. Alexei Kremenyuk, Deputy Chief of the Future Plan Cell in the National Guard of Ukraine.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a big honor to speak in front of you. First of all, I would like to thank you all our partners for your support. Let me introduce shortly myself. I am a civilian guy who was, before the full-scale invasion, I worked as an economist at the National Bank of Ukraine. But when Russia came to my country, me and my father and brother, we voluntarily joined one of the battalions of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Then I was promoted to one of the branches of Armed Forces of Ukraine, where I conducted some analytical job. And then I moved again to one of the brigades of the National Guard of Ukraine. It's a Khartia brigade, where I'm currently, we are fighting in the Kharkiv region, and I am a planning officer there. And from my analytical and combat experience, I bring you two important points. The first one is that Ukrainian sovereignty and integrity should be a crucial, and it is a crucial deterrent to further Russian invasion in Europe. Because we know that Russia won't stop in Ukraine, and if we allow it to do, they just continue and will seize another country, another territory. The last year I lost my good friend, and it is a big irony that he died near the city of New York in the Donetsk region. But the biggest irony is that he won the scholarship in one of the New York university before the invasion began. And I ask you, don't make his death pointless, and death of others, brave men and women in Ukraine. And another point is that what I've seen from the perspective of planning officer, that quality can beat quantity. And in means of quality, I mean not quality of some equipment or machinery. I mean quality in terms of education and training of our personnel, of our units, commanders, and soldiers. And it's very important because any weapon can fight without proper educated and proper trained personnel. And I think that only together we can create good programs, very perfect programs of education and training. And only together we can beat the enemy, and we can beat like this Russia forces. And moreover, we can deliver to you our experience and share it with you, because no country in the world has the same experience as we are, except of Russia. But Russia wants to destroy the current world order, but we want to be a part of civilized world. And let me conclude. We will fight until the last of our breath. But I think it's in your arms how many persons, not only in military but in civilians, will die before we create, retain our sovereignty and our independence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll turn to Dmytro Finashin, who is an advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs. Dmytro is going to speak in Ukrainian, so if you could just put on your headsets.
Доброго дня.
Hello.
Коротко представлюся.
I will briefly introduce myself just for you to understand that my words are not an invention and that it's justified. Since 2015 I have served in the National Guard. I was at the war before the full-fledged war. I was operator of the drone in the sniper group. Then I was a sniper in the same group. Then at the full-fledged war already I was wounded. Amputated. My hand was well amputated. Also, I received the highest award, the Hero of Ukraine, from the President. After that, I served as an officer of reconnaissance in one of the top drone strike aviation divisions. Now I am the advisor to the Ministry of Internal Affairs on the veteran policy. I retired a month ago from the military, and I'm an advisor now. Despite the result of this chess game, which is being played now, unchanged will be one thing. Ukraine, it is Ukraine which is an opportunity also for Ukraine to become more independent from the security point of view from the United States. Our biggest value is our military and our people, our soldiers, because, as my colleague said, none of the systems are going to operate without a soldier. Who is a Ukrainian soldier today? This is the same kind of person as we are, as we all are here today. It's just that this person, in his soul, forever is filled with war, and this war will never go away from this person. He or she will always live with this war, will always be prepared to the war, and will perceive everything from the prism of the war. After the famine, after the Holodomor, people who managed to survive, they were preserving dry bread until their last day, trying to make sure they're ready for difficult conditions. The same works with the war. We will always be ready for one. And Ukrainian soldier is the person that has been tested by warfare. And that's extremely important. I have been in many hostilities where experienced warriors have been fighting with unexperienced, and always experience prevailed. That's of critical importance. Also, we have a big army of people who have gone through those hostilities already, and believe me, they are much more prepared to fight than those who have been just theoretically trained. And even in 5 years, in 10 years from now, that person, that soldier, that warrior will still remain one. He will keep that expertise, wartime expertise, and it will never go away. It will always be able to be ready to use to fight with our enemy, with the Russians. And it's important that these soldiers are not only in Ukrainian army. Russia has even more. And this is a huge force. It cannot be underestimated. So I propose to you to be united, strengthen thyself, save us, and invite us to join the NATO. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for your perspectives and your spine-stiffening words. I think it's important that we hear those. I'd like to now turn to, we have a number of US congressmen here, so we could hear a different perspective from the United States, beyond the Trump administration. Is Congressman Joe Wilson here? And would you like to offer your perspective on what needs to lie ahead? Thank you, sir.
And ladies and gentlemen and friends of Ukraine, it's such an honor to be here, and it's so inspiring. And to me, it's inspiring the people of Ukraine, which inspires those of us in America to be so supportive. And the vast majority of the American people do support the people of Ukraine. One message I have is indeed, we're not talking about Ukrainian war, it's a Russian war. The Russian war, to me, actually began with the acquisition or the occupation of Belarus. And then, of course, you have a Russian war into Crimea, into Donbass, into South Ossetia and Abkhazia of Georgia, to maintaining troops in Transnistria. So over the importance of the victory by the people of Ukraine is that it's so important to stop the Russian war. And also, just in the last 2 months, there's been a victory that should be fully recognized, which would have not been possible if it hadn't been for the people of Ukraine. And that is that the dictatorship in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, when he had the situation of deterioration of his capabilities, when he reached out to Putin for assistance, because of the success of the people of Ukraine, he was not able to provide aid. And so the dictatorship of 40 years collapsed in 12 days. What inspiration. And so the people of Ukraine should look to what they've done to help create a positive environment, a new opportunity for the people of Syria, also a great opportunity for Mr. Putin to take his Navy base out of the Mediterranean, to take his air base out of Syria, which was so important for the logistics to maintain the dictatorships that he backs up in Africa. The ripple effect of the positive, hard work and success of the people of Ukraine is becoming very evident. God bless Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to now turn actually to an observer of Ukraine, Anne Applebaum, who has written trenchantly about Ukraine for a long time, and very presciently, I think, about Vladimir Putin in particular. You've heard this conversation here this morning. You've been following what has come out of the administration. Give us your sense of whether Ukraine is in a more perilous position now or not.
Thank you, Zanny, for this unexpected honor. The real question to me, well, there are two questions. One is, when we talk about a ceasefire, are the Russians prepared not just to stop fighting, but to give up their fundamental goal? Their goal is the destruction of Ukraine. They've said it, Putin has said it, many other people have said it, you can hear it any night on Russian television. They mean the removal of Ukrainian sovereignty, they mean the crushing of Ukrainian independence. One way or another, they mean the replacement of the Ukrainian government. If they can't fully achieve it militarily, then there is no doubt that they'll try to do it through hybrid war, through political games, through through sabotage or through other means, just as they did before the war began. And that understanding has to be part of the negotiation from the beginning, that remains their goal and that they have not dropped it. If you want lasting peace in Ukraine, there are two possibilities. One is that the Russians drop that goal, and if they did that, we would know, we would hear it, you would be able to tell. It would probably involve a profound political change in Moscow, not necessarily regime change, but you would see a political alteration, and then we would know they had dropped that goal. The second the second possibility is that the moment, if there were to be a ceasefire, and I have not yet heard the Russians say they're going to have one, that they will stop fighting, but if they did stop fighting, there is a very, very dangerous moment after that when the physical war will have stopped, but political pressure, other kinds of games, hybrid war, attempts to win over different parts of the European and American political community would continue. And so the question is, are we, and this is a question for the Trump administration, but also for Europeans, are we prepared for that moment? This is going to be a very, very dangerous moment after they stop fighting. Will we therefore have some kind of security structure in place, both to prevent the fighting from renewing, but also to make sure that Ukraine is a viable state, that the Ukrainian industry, people are able to invest in Ukraine. Ukrainians don't leave the country because they're afraid the war will restart. So there has to be some kind of structure in place. And so my only question to everybody involved is, have you thought that piece of it through, and are you prepared for that kind of danger?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to spring that on you. Let me turn with that to our three European leaders here, four European leaders, actually. And I'm going to start, Mette Frederiksen, with you, both to respond to Anne's question, but also to the admirably plain-spoken words of General Kellogg, which is, you guys are not going to be at the table. Or it's unlikely that you'll be at the table. How do you react to that? And how do you, given that likely reality, build the kinds of unified, secure European approach that, sorry, do you want to clarify something?
Well, no, it's not clarify. I just want to make sure because the audience will say, when you say at the table, I want you to make sure you define the term. Okay. Do you mean you are sitting like at table 3? Or are all of your interests brought into the discussion? That answer is yes. If that's at your table, yes. If it's sitting there like they're sitting right there with Victor and the rest of them that's going to be a different story.
Yeah, but you'll be filtered. Your interests will be filtered. You won't be actually at the table. Okay, Prime Minister.
But Anne is raising the right question. And if we don't believe that Russia is willing to stop, then it changes totally the discussion we need to have. And I don't think they're going to stop. I'm sorry, and I haven't seen any signals from Russia for many years that underlines a Russian willingness to stop the war in Ukraine or anywhere else. I'm not saying that we are at war, but we cannot claim that we are in peacetime anymore. And a hybrid car is still a car, right? Hybrid war
is a war.
So if for me, I mean, there is a big risk that something that will look nice on a paper will give Russia the possibility to mobilize, to reamp, and to continue. Maybe in Ukraine or somewhere else.
I'm going to come back to you in a second, General. Yes, Mr. President.
When I finished my previous intervention, I said we're looking at US. But we're looking to have a plan, because now we know we have a willingness for agreement between Russia and Ukraine. But there is no plan. There is only one plan, which is Zelensky's peace plan. So there is no plan yet. If we see the plan, then it's also reason to sit behind the table and discuss the matter. But I agree with Mr. Kellogg that it's not just sitting around the table, 20 members of EU and so forth. Yeah. But we need to know what's going on and what we're going to discuss about.
Prime Minister Plenković, did you want to add your European perspective here?
You know, Croatia was supposed to lose the war in the 90s. We won against all odds, under sanctions and embargo, and no single weapon that was given to us without it being smuggled. What Ukraine has done in the meantime is a heroic struggle, incredible resilience, inspiration in terms of quest for freedom, and I think that should be respected. And that's why, from my, but not mine, only point of view, I think majority of the European leaders understand that whatever the outcome of the talks, negotiations, and I hope that the European Union or whoever it is on our side will be sitting during these negotiations at the table, should bring about a just and principled peace. Anything which is less than that is a horrible message to the future crisis, to the future expansionist policies, to the future aggressions, and to the future instability not only on Europe but of the world. Because if you look at the numbers, during the first term of President Trump, he was pushing the European leaders to spend more on defense. But actually, it was Putin's aggression that delivered in terms of increased military spending in Europe. And I think that now, especially given our last debate, we had a leaders' debate on defense 10 days ago, I think that the flexibility in terms of fiscal rules, when it comes to defense spending, determination to increase the European technological industrial defense base, and to continue militarily assisting Ukraine, so to make it stronger in order to defend its territory, should be going in parallel with the peace attempts. And that's why appreciating the initiatives coming from the new administration, I think all of these elements should be taken account. The time that is behind us does not allow us or anybody to be politically naive. If Russia spends 10% of GDP on military spending, 40% of the budget, this is not a short-term exercise. This is a war economy which has, I would say, long-term goals. And I think it's up to us to take that into account in the context of peace negotiations.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to you in a second, General Kellogg, but Minister Sternegard, the Foreign Minister of Sweden, would like to make a comment. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for arranging this. Well, I have one statement and I have one question. So first a statement. I have heard so many politicians, European politicians, saying in their constituencies that Ukraine is not fighting only for their freedom, but also for our freedom. But I mean that if they truly meant that, then they would deliver a lot more. So it is up to the whole of Europe, all of European countries, to do whatever they can to make sure that Ukraine actually negotiates from a very strong position. This is absolutely necessary, and it is about our future. So my question goes to Kellogg, and thank you so much for your clarifications and for a good meeting this morning. So I believe that you are now expecting answers from us whether we can provide soldiers on the ground after some sort of peace. And if we should be able to answer that, then we really need to be at the table if we're supposed to be on the ground. So please, please, let us join.
Yeah, I mean, that's there's about 3 or 4 answers I want to do, and I'll make them quickly. It's sort of like speed dialing right here. One is, we've been at this for 25 days. And I would challenge anybody in this room or anybody listening. In 4 years of the first Trump presidency, how much land did Russia occupy? None. How many times did they challenge us? Once. And go back and look at your history. That was in Syria, when they attacked across the Euphrates River with the Wagner Group, attacked U.S. Special Forces, and President Trump directed retaliation, and we knew where they were. And you can look it in the books. Over 300 Russians were killed that day. We will respond. This president will respond. It's been 25 days. I think we're going to be okay with it. To the soldiers who have fought valiantly that have been in Ukraine, and they have. And as a former soldier, I respect what you've done. But when we think about the great thing, when you think about it, and this is a challenge to them, and anybody in the room that's willing to answer this question, if you've ever done triage as a medic, what's the first thing you do? Stop the bleeding. Then you treat for shock. And what we're trying to do is you're trying to stop the bleeding. And then we'll treat for the shock after that. It's sort of like the medical triage. And when you look at it, when we look at the negotiation, the discussions, we are clearly going to be having the interest of what's happening with the alliance out there. But what you want to do is you want to make sure it's clean, it's there, it's effective. What we don't want to do is to get into a large group discussion. I have a kind of an in-house human joke or humanistic joke about it. When I look around all of the parks in the United States of America, I have yet to find a single statue, not one, dedicated to a committee. It's always dedicated to an individual, maybe 1 or 2. Those are the hard calls, but nobody's going to be excluded. When I say that's the reason I said you have to define your terms about physically are you sitting at the table or are your concerns going to be addressed. Of course they're going to be addressed. Of course they're going to be taken into consideration. But we are trying to end this in a short period of time. President Trump inherited this war of 3 years ago. Okay, his desire, purpose is to make sure this war stops. It stops for good, and the aggression is over, and Ukraine remains a sovereign, secure state with security backing behind it. That's the intent, and that's going to depend on everybody in this room when we talk about security guarantees. You have to understand, when you sign up for these security guarantees, that is an obligation. And the reason I say that, and I challenge many people that are out there, right now, 2014 Wales Declaration, all the NATO allies, 2% of GDP, 20% of that was modernization. There are still 8 nations who've not even gotten to that number, okay? So when we get to it, make sure you check your 6, as they say, that the obligation is upon you when we make these commitments to respond to that as well. So there's a challenge for you. But I go back to what I said before. There's one person I have great confidence in because he's proven by his track record. You know, that's Donald J. Trump. He said he's committed himself to this. He's going to do it. And the Russians in the past, historically, have never violated what he considers to be his red line, and they wouldn't do it. And if you don't believe me, Pick up the phone and call Baghdadi. His number's been disconnected. Find Soleimani. His number's been disconnected. Ask Assad. He's in Moscow. Ask him how he liked after he used nerve gas on the civilians. All those were responses that we took immediately. They were aggressive responses. One thing I would always tell the world out there, be very, very careful when you go against Donald J. Trump. Make sure you understand the consequences that you may face when you face a president like he is.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you for the final word in a second, but first, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine. Jump in.
Thank you, General. And I just also part of my mandate is making Ukraine to join the European Union. And I think that this is whatever table we're talking about, this is the table we're going to sit. And this is not a question for Ukraine. This is part of the conditionalities for ending the war, that Ukraine will become a member of European Union. And the very fact that Russians are not really very public about their position about that, they have been putting it into every discussion which has been there before. So this is something where European Union has to say a word, whatever the configuration of discussions will be. But also, I think it's very important that we all understand that probably some initial steps which are done through the leadership of the United States does not mean that US would not have to engage with Europe or European Union later, because how Russians operate, we all know. They will, and we had a lot of European leaders in Moscow since the beginning of the full-scale aggression. Let's not forget about that. And Ukraine has a huge experience of communicating with these leaders who has been passing to Ukraine nothing but the ultimate truths which were conveyed in Russia. So this is the first thing Russians will be doing. And then one of the issues they always put in the agenda is the sanctions, lifting the sanctions. And here you have to agree with Europe. Also in Europe, European Union has more than 300 billions of Russian frozen assets. They are in Europe. And they would put a question mark, I mean, Russians will be putting a question mark that they want them back. And then there will be a necessity to reach out Europe, and there will be a necessity to reach out Ukraine when Ukraine will put on the table Ukraine's membership to European Union. So I would not really be over-depressed with what is happening now. These are just the first steps. And I think we should really concentrate on what we can do now, because surviving through the war is much more than just, having a good political dialogue. It's a massive macro-financial support to Ukraine and mobilization of a lot of financial assistance and resources. It's the reforms, it's the military assistance, and this is not something that should be put on hold. It should be scaled up, and here the role of European Union is huge. And in fact, while we're speaking about very important things, one of the fascinating EU member states blocking Ukraine's accession to European Union, and it just happened yesterday. So basically, I think there are so many things on the pipeline, and everyone has its fair share to deliver on. And there's only one thing I always say by the end of every discussion is that things might change dramatically around the world, but there's one thing will not change. Ukraine will never let you down, and whatever we say, we deliver on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are unfortunately getting close to 3 o'clock, but there is one last thing I really would like General Kellogg to answer, which was the question that Anne Applebaum raised, and many of you echoed. Putin does not appear to be interested in a ceasefire. It seems to me that one could argue that President Trump is more interested in a ceasefire than President Putin right now. And the urgency is coming from the US side. Is there a risk, frankly and plainly spoken, of a sellout to President Putin from a president in the United States who wants to get an agreement fast so that he can say he has got this agreement?
No, because I think the comment's absurd. I mean, President Trump is not going to, he's not going to sell out. I think what it goes back to what we said before is I think you have to look at it in stages. Do you go, you go to an intermediate stage, which is ceasefire, to ceasefire into a full plan, or you go to a peace plan? I think that's part of the discussion that you want to get to end it. But that's what I talked about earlier when it's a comment is, you know, we're at a level in this war, the world is, you're at a level that is World War II level of violence. It's institutional level violence. So the question is, okay, I always got the feeling, and I know it's a harsh assessment, that the policy and the strategy of the United States before was, we're going to keep funding Ukraine to the death of every last Ukrainian soldier. It's okay, you know, that's wrong. You know, as somebody who's served and fought, is you look and said, look, I understand what they're going through out there, and what you want to do is at least stop the killing, reset, rearm, refit, whatever you want to call it. But no, it's not an expediency level. It's the idea that how do you build? But the first thing you're going to get to is you have to define the term. And when you look at the, you know, what does stable security arrangement look like? And I think that's when you get to that point that you get there. But I said, if you say that to get to it, what you said, you want us to get to a ceasefire as fast as you can, that means we don't care what one of the parties talks about. We've always said before that Ukraine is obviously a party of the conflict. And the Ukrainians are obviously part of that decision. They have to be part of that decision. They're the ones fighting and dying on the battlefield. So I think when you make a comment like that, I think the reason I come back a little bit harshly on it, but on an expediency, that's the furthest thing from our mind. What we're trying to find is we look at the long-range implications of this war. You know, everybody needs to understand that this war, when you think about it, is the expansion of this war. You know, you were looking at the dangers that you face of an expanding war that we hadn't seen before because of the simple alliances that we are seeing. The alliance in the Middle East with Iran, the alliance in the Far East with China, the alliance in the Far East with North Korea, and you've got Russia proper, something we had not seen 4 years ago. So it's a different environment. So we understand that. And I said we are looking at this on a very strategic level, not a tactical level, but a very strategic level of what does this look like then, not just for Europe, but this is a global issue. And the president said that. This is not, you cannot restrict this conflict intellectually to just Europe. You have to think about this. This is a global fight. And if you don't think it's a global fight, you're wrong. Example, I mean, it's really simple. Who's buying levels of oil and gas from Russia right now? European Union. Not just the European Union, but you look at a country like India. India's increased their buy from the Russians from 11% to 40%. Okay, so you kind of look and say, okay, everybody's in this game. And you think about it. And remember, members of the European Union laughed at President Trump when he said you need to shut down Nord Stream. You all remember that? Okay? He cautioned you about buying Russian gas and oil because he knew where the money was going. Okay? So you think about that and we are looking this at a level that has not been looked at before, which is a geostrategic level that we think is important for global security. So I think we're on the right path, and we want to have it, and that's the reason why, one of the reasons I'm here, one of the reasons I'm at the Munich Security Conference, one of the reasons we're talking to allies is to sit down and say, and honestly, what are you thinking? And let me just close with this, because I made this comment before, and unfortunately most of my team isn't here because they've heard it so many times. But it's like people would come into a room with a really ugly dog, and what diplomats will say, that's an unusual animal, can you tell me about it? Okay, we've reached a point when somebody comes to the room, they said, that's an ugly dog, and how do we fix it? We now want absolute surety. We want commitment. We want honesty. And we want to develop a plan that is going to be long-term. Not it feels good because we're diplomats, this is how we do it. But we're looking for ground truth and solving this right now.
Well, thank you, General, for your honesty and your clarity. And I think this room hopes that this plan, when it is developed in conjunction with your allies in Ukraine, leads to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine with a clear signal of who is the aggressor and who has lost, and a secure Europe. And if that's where you're heading, then I'm sure everyone is behind you. Thank you.